There's a piston-pumping rhythm in my chest that counts down to my death every 60 minutes. 53 minutes now, always counting, always hunting. The device they installed where my heart used to be doesn't care about rest or mercy or the fact that I haven't slept in how long? Days blur into weeks, blur into months when you're measuring life in 60-minute intervals. The cardiac timer, they called it during installation. Clinical name for a bomb wrapped around what remains of my cardiovascular system. Every hour, I kill or I die. Simple mathematics. Brutal efficiency. The Imperium excels at turning humans into weapons that solve their own logistics problems. My name is Davian Cross, and I've been killing for 347 days. But let me take you back before the timer. Before I learned that the human body can function on pure adrenaline and terror for longer than any medical text suggests possible. Back when I was still entirely human, I was 26 years old when they took me. Manufacturum worker, third shift, Hive Tertius on Scintilla. Nothing remarkable about my existence, exactly the kind of invisible citizen the Imperium processes by the millions without recording names. I assembled power coupling housings for lasgun production, 12-hour shifts, protein paste rations, a bunk I shared with 3 other workers in rotation. Not a good life, but it was a life. I had a father somewhere in the lower hives, though I hadn't seen him in 6 years. I had a brother, Kellen, who worked the protein reclamation vats and smelled like corpse starch, even after scrubbing. I had a routine. The Arbites came during shift change. Not for me specifically. They hauled away 47 of us in restraint nets before anyone understood what was happening. Mass conscription? Someone shouted. Labor levy, another guessed. We were wrong. Both wrong. This was something the Imperium had crafted for a specific kind of warfare, a specific kind of nightmare that required very specific components. Components that used to be human. They transported us to a facility that had no designation markers, no Imperial eagles, nothing but bare rockcrete and the smell of counterseptic that never quite masked the underlying rote. Military installation, I thought initially, but the architecture was wrong. Too many medical bays, too many operating theaters, too many cells with restraint frames and drainage grates. They didn't tell us anything for 6 days. 47 of us, all male, I noted, ranging from teenagers to graybeards, crammed into a holding cell designed for 20. They fed us. Protein paste, same as the manufacturer. Water that tasted like recyc filters. The normalcy of the rations was almost worse than starvation would have been. Like they were maintaining livestock before processing. Carvin, a loader from the cargo docks, started praying on the 3rd day. Not quiet prayers. Loud, desperate recitations of the Imperial Creed that echoed off the rockcrete walls until the sound became just noise. The Emperor protects, he chanted, over and over, voice cracking. The Emperor watches over the faithful. The Emperor doesn't know we exist, said an older man named Thex, former enforcer from his scars and bearing. Whatever's happening here, we're off the books. Probably off the planet's official census. Start accepting that now. Carvin kept praying anyway. The words were meaningless sounds, but I understood why he made them. When you have no control, ritual provides the illusion of agency. The ecclesiarchy had spent decades programming those responses into the population. Say the words, perform the genuflection, and surely salvation will follow. Conditioning masquerading as faith. I didn't pray. My father had been a skeptic before the enforcers beat it out of him during a labor dispute. He taught me young. The Imperium's gods are the same as its nobles. They take, they don't give. He'd been disappeared for that kind of talk eventually. I learned to keep my mouth shut. Didn't make me believe the propaganda any more than he had, just made me better at pretending. On day 7, they began the processing. They took us in groups of 5. Carvin went in the first group, still praying. I went in the third group with Tex and 3 others whose names I never learned. They marched us through corridors that smelled like counterseptic and fear sweat. Decades of fear sweat soaked into the walls, the scent of thousands processed before us. The surgical theater was large enough to operate on all 5 of us simultaneously. 5 operating frames arranged in a circle, face up, restraints already open like hungry jaws. The lighting was harsh, shadowless, the kind that makes everything look flat and dead. Around the perimeter stood chirurgeons in stained surgical robes, not the clean white of medical personnel, but the gray-brown of fabric that had seen too much blood to ever come clean. A tech priest entered last, hunched under the weight of mechadendrites that sprouted from his spine like a metal spider's legs. His face, what remained of it, was more augmetic than flesh, lenses clicking and whirring as he studied us. When he spoke, his voice was a vox-corrupted rasp that barely sounded human. "You are components," he stated. No preamble. "Your biological functions will be repurposed for the Imperium's glory. This facility manufactures chrono-combatants, tactical assets for sustained engagement in hostile-occupied territory. You will be fitted with cardiac timers calibrated to 60-minute intervals. Failure to eliminate hostile targets within the allotted time results in terminal detonation. Success resets the timer. This is your function now. Adapt or expire. Just like that. No ceremony. No grand purpose. You are components." They strapped me to the operating frame before I could process the full meaning. Restraints across forehead, throat, chest, waist, thighs, ankles. Individual finger locks that prevented even the smallest movement. The frame tilted back 45 degrees, positioning me to watch the procedure on my own body. "Anesthesia is contraindicated," the tech priest said, those lenses focusing on my face. "Pain response is necessary for calibration. Remain conscious." Then the chirurgeons began. The first incision ran from my sternum to just below my ribs, a vertical line of fire that made every muscle in my body try to convulse against the restraints. I screamed. Everyone screamed, the 5 of us shrieking in harmony while the chirurgeons worked with the efficiency of manufacturing workers assembling standard components. Which, I suppose, was exactly what they were doing. They cracked my sternum with a bone spreader that clicked like a ratchet wrench. Click, 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 each click accompanied by a cracking sound I felt in my teeth. My ribs separated. My chest cavity opened to the recycled air. I could feel the temperature difference. Cold air against organs that were never meant to feel air at all. One of the chirurgeons reached into my chest. I felt fingers. Gloved but still fingers, still recognizably human. Touch my heart, my actual heart. The organ continued beating around the intrusion. Thump, 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 utterly indifferent to the violation. Hands that should never touch a living heart held mine like it was nothing more remarkable than a water pump. Which is all it was, really. Just a pump. The realization cut through the pain. This thing I'd thought of as the seat of emotion, the metaphorical core of humanity, was just meat performing a function. No poetry, no divine spark, just a muscle contracting on schedule. The tech priest moved to my side, mechadendrites carrying tools I couldn't name. Cardiac timer installation requires integration with the sinoatrial node, ventricles, and major vessels, he narrated, apparently for the chirurgeon's benefit. The device monitors cardiac output and neural activity. Should 60 minutes elapse without the specific endocrine cascade produced by successful combat killing, the detonation sequence activates. One of his mechadendrites extended something that looked like a metal crab crossed with a pocket chrono. It was small, maybe the size of 2 fists, but dense, heavy, made from dark metal inscribed with circuitry I didn't understand. At its center, a countdown display glowed a dull red. 60, 00. They placed it directly on top of my heart. The device sprouted filaments, hundreds of hair-thin wires that began burrowing into cardiac tissue like parasitic worms. I felt each one penetrate. Not pain exactly, but wrongness. The sensation of being invaded at the cellular level by something that didn't belong. The filaments spread through my heart muscle, wrapped around vessels, penetrated chambers, merged with the organ until device and flesh became a single hybrid thing. My heart was no longer entirely mine. They closed me up with industrial staples. No sutures, no careful stitching, just chunk of a staple gun sealing flesh. 47 staples from sternum to navel. I counted each one. Counting gave me something to focus on, besides the reality that I now had a bomb fused to my cardiovascular system. The entire procedure took 93 minutes. When they released the restraints, the tech priest activated the device. I felt it sync with my heartbeat, felt the timer begin counting in rhythm with my pulse. Thump tick, thump tick, thump tick. My body's rhythm was now a countdown to my death. "You have 60 minutes, the tech priest stated. "Armory is 2 levels down. You will be transported to combat zone immediately. Kill or die, function or fail." Glory to the Omniscience. Not glory to the Emperor, I noticed. Not even the Emperor protects. Just acknowledgement of function and a benediction to the machine god. The Mechanicus' own false deity, the gear cult superstition they use to justify hoarding technology. Different branding, same control mechanism. They herded us, stumbling, bleeding, holding our stapled shut chests, down to the armory. Rows of weapons, autoguns, lasguns, stubbers, combat knives, grenades, flamers. "Take what you can carry," they told us. "You'll need all of it." I grabbed an autogun, 3 magazines, a knife, 2 frag grenades. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the ammunition. Next to me, Thex was loading a stubber with the practiced efficiency of his former enforcer training, face gray with shock, but hands still steady. Carvin stood paralyzed in front of the weapons, prayer beads clutched in one hand, unable to make his brain process the transition from faithful citizen to sanctioned murderer. "Move," a guard barked, slamming a shock maul into Carvin's back. 47 minutes remaining. Transport leaves in 5. Miss it. Die here. That got Carvin moving. Fear is a more effective motivator than any prayer. They loaded us into a transport flyer. All 47 of us, fresh surgical wounds still bleeding through our clothing, armed with weapons we'd had no training to use. The pilot didn't look back at his cargo, didn't care. We were ammunition, not people. You don't have conversations with ammunition. The flight took 23 minutes. I watched the timer in my chest, not visible, but I could feel it now. Feel the countdown like a second pulse. 24:00 remaining when we landed. The cargo ramp dropped, revealing a war zone that had probably once been a city. Now it was rubble and corpses and the smell of burning promethium. "Orc-occupied territory," the guard said, shoving the first row of us toward the ramp. "Greenskins everywhere. Should be easy enough to find targets. Kill 1 every hour, or the timer does it for you. No pickup, no extraction. You're deployed until you fail. Emperor's mercy on you all." It was just the phrase you're supposed to say. Meaningless sounds. The Emperor, that corpse thing rotting on a golden throne, that tyrannical relic from a forgotten age, had no mercy to give. If he'd ever had any, he'd spent it millennia ago. What we called the Emperor's mercy was just the statistical probability that you'd die quickly instead of slowly. We stumbled off the transport into hell. 18 minutes on my timer. Somewhere in this rubble I needed to find something to kill or I'd die. Just like that, the Imperium had transformed me from manufactorum worker to hunter, from citizen to predator. I'd never killed anyone before, never even been in a fight beyond the occasional shoving match in the food queues. Now I had 18 minutes to learn. The transport lifted off immediately, engines screaming, abandoning us in the ruins. Around me, the other Chrono-Combatants scattered, each searching for targets. I heard gunfire almost immediately. Someone had found orcs, or the orcs had found them. Hard to say which was worse. I ran. Not toward the gunfire, toward I didn't know where. Just away. Survival instinct overriding the fact that running away meant certain death. My chest burned where they'd stapled me shut, each breath pulling at the fresh wounds. Blood seeped through my shirt, sticky and warm. My hands shook on the autogun, finger nowhere near the trigger because I was terrified I'd shoot myself. 15 minutes, a roar erupted from my left, deep, animal wrong. I spun, and there it was. My first orc, 3 meters tall, muscle-bound and tusked, wearing armor made from scrap metal and what looked like human bones. It carried an axe the size of my torso, serrated blade still dripping with something red. When it saw me, it grinned, actually grinned, like this was entertainment instead of life and death. It charged. I raised the autogun and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Safety still engaged. The orc closed half the distance while I fumbled with the weapon, thumbing at controls I didn't understand, panic eating my fine motor control. It raised the axe, bellowing something in its guttural language, preparing to split me vertically. The safety clicked off. I pulled the trigger. The autogun roared, recoil slamming into my shoulder, muzzle climbing as I held the trigger down in a spray and pray that would have made any proper soldier weep. 30 rounds downrange in 3 seconds. Most missed. Some hit the orc's armor and sparked off. 3, maybe 4, actually penetrated flesh. The orc staggered, looked down at the holes in its abdomen with what seemed like surprise, then looked back at me with rage that transcended language. It charged again. I dropped the autogun, no time to reload, and grabbed one of the frag grenades, thumbed the activation stud, and threw it with all the accuracy of a manufacturing worker who'd never thrown a grenade in his life. By sheer luck, it bounced off the orc's chest. I threw myself flat as the grenade detonated. The explosion was pressure and heat and sound condensed into a single physics-defying moment. Shrapnel whined overhead. Something wet splattered across my back. When I looked up, the orc was down, most of it anyway. The grenade had detonated against its torso, and what remained was more meat sculpture than living creature. But dead, definitely dead. My timer reset. 60. 00. I felt it happen. Felt the device register my elevated heart rate, the adrenaline flooding my system, the specific biochemical signature of a successful kill. The cardiac timer measured all of it, confirmed I'd fulfilled my function, and granted me another hour of life. I vomited into the rubble, entire body shaking, the reality crashing down. I just killed a sentient creature to save my own life, and I'd have to do it again in 60 minutes, or die. This was my function now. I retrieved the autogun, reloaded it with trembling hands, and kept moving. Behind me, I heard more gunfire, more explosions. The other Chrono-Combatants were hunting too, each fighting their own private countdown. We were a dispersed weapon system, 47 individual hunter-killers scattered across the war zone, each with a 1-hour timer, forcing constant aggression, efficient, brutal, utterly expendable. The Imperium had turned us into perpetual murder machines that required no supply lines, no commands, no logistics beyond the initial deployment. We'd hunt until we failed, and then we'd detonate, possibly taking an enemy with us in death. Even our failures were weaponized. I found a collapsed building that offered some cover and checked my timer. 47, 23 remaining. 47 minutes to find another target. I was bleeding from a dozen cuts I didn't remember getting. My chest screamed with pain from the surgery and the exertion, and my hands couldn't stop shaking. But I was alive. That first day was learning that alive and living are different concepts. I killed 4 more times in the first 24 hours, an orc scout at hour 2. 2 orcs fighting over a corpse at hour 3. Caught them distracted, emptied a magazine into both. A lone greenskin at hour 5, this one smaller, maybe a juvenile that went down after 1 shot to the head. Each kill bought me another 60 minutes. Each reset came with the same flood of relief horror, the body's celebration of survival mixing with the mind's revulsion at what survival cost. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. 57 minutes of consciousness meant if I fell asleep, I'd never wake up. The human body isn't designed for that kind of sustained wakefulness. After 36 hours, I started hallucinating, shadows moving in my peripheral vision, voices calling my name from the rubble. My thoughts became sticky, slow, like moving through high viscosity fluid. But the timer kept counting. 60, 00, 59, 59, 59, 58. Relentless as a heartbeat. Because it was my heartbeat, the device synchronized with my body's rhythm, turning the most basic autonomic function into a countdown. I saw other Chrono-Combatants occasionally, Thex on day 2 fighting 3 orcs simultaneously with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd already learned the rules. We made eye contact across the battlefield but didn't stop to speak, no time for conversation when you're on a clock. Later I saw Carvin's body, or what remained after the timer detonated. The cardiac timer didn't just stop your heart when it reached 0. It exploded, messy, destructive. Even in death, we were weapons. 9 Chrono-Combatants died in the first 48 hours. I only know because I saw some of the explosions, distant thundercracks that meant someone had run out of time or suffered catastrophic injury that prevented them from hunting. Each boom was a reminder. That's what happens when you fail. The sleep deprivation became critical around 70 hours. I was hallucinating constantly by then, seeing my father in the rubble, hearing Kellen calling me from burned-out buildings. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the autogun. But I kept hunting because the alternative was death. Somewhere around hour 90, my body gave up on sleep entirely. Adrenaline became my constant state, the timer's threat keeping my system in perpetual fight or flight. The cardiac timer wasn't just counting down. It was changing my biochemistry, rewiring my nervous system to function on pure survival instinct. I wasn't sleeping, but I wasn't fully conscious either. I existed in a state between, a walking nightmare state where only the hunt mattered. Days blurred, weeks blurred. How many orcs did I kill? 30? 50? I lost count after the first week. They blurred together into an endless parade of green flesh and red blood and the wet sounds bodies make when bullets puncture them. I learned which shots killed fastest. Headshots, always headshots. Learned to anticipate their movements. Learned to use the environment to my advantage. I became efficient. That was the horror. Not that I was killing, but that I was becoming good at it. Month 2, I started hunting other things. The orc-occupied territory included human cultists, traitor guard, scavengers. The timer didn't discriminate about what I killed, only that I killed. Humans died easier than orcs, softer, smaller, less redundancy in their vital systems. A single shot often sufficed. I stopped thinking about it. Stopped letting myself think about it, because thinking led to questions like, was he conscripted like me? Or, did she have a choice? Questions that didn't matter because the timer kept counting. 60, 00, 59, 59, 59, 58. I encountered Thex again in month 3. He'd lost weight, lost parts of himself that weren't visible in the flesh. His eyes had that flat, dead quality I'd seen in veterans at the manufactorum, the ones who'd survived conflicts but left their humanity on the battlefield. We shared ammunition. I had autogun magazines, he had stubber rounds we could trade. No conversation. No, how are you holding up? Because the answer was obvious. We were holding up by killing every 60 minutes, by existing only to hunt, by surrendering everything human to satisfy the machine in our chests. Do you dream? Thex asked suddenly, the first words either of us had spoken. Can't sleep, I said. Timer won't let me. I mean before. Did you dream before? His voice was hoarse, damaged from screaming or dehydration or both. I tried to remember. Had I dreamed? Must have, everyone dreams, but the memories felt ancient, archaeological, like I was trying to remember a previous life. I don't remember. It's taking the past, The timer's eating everything except the present. 60 minutes ahead, that's all that exists anymore. Everything before this is fading. He was right. I couldn't remember my father's face clearly anymore. Couldn't recall Kellen's voice. The memories were abstractions. I knew intellectually I'd had a father, a brother, a life before this. But the specifics were deteriorating like old pict captures left in sunlight. The cardiac timer was consuming more than time. It was consuming identity. I tried to say my own name aloud. Davian Cross. I'm Davian Cross from Hive Tertius, third shift manufacturing worker, assembly line 4. Speaking the facts like they were prayers, trying to anchor myself to who I'd been. But the name felt foreign in my mouth, like a word in a language I was forgetting. We parted ways. I never saw Thex again. I assume he eventually failed, eventually ran out of time or took wounds that prevented hunting. I assume his timer detonated and scattered what remained across the rubble. I assume, but I don't know. In the permanent present of the 60-minute cycle, past and future collapse into irrelevance. There is only now, only the hunt, only the countdown. Month 5, I stopped trying to remember my name. I started calling myself by my kill count instead. 57, then 83, then 149, each number representing another hour purchased with another life taken. Numbers were easier than names. Numbers didn't require memory or identity or personhood. Numbers just accumulated. The surgical wounds healed, leaving a vertical ridge of scar tissue from sternum to navel. The staples had fallen out or been torn out during fights, leaving 47 puncture marks that mirrored the timer's original 60. My body was becoming a tally sheet, each mark a record of transformation. The fresh-faced manufacturing worker was gone. In his place, something harder, leaner, more efficient. A tool honed by necessity. I learned to hunt in my sleep, or what passed for sleep. The body requires rest, even when the mind can't afford it. So I'd entered a state the chirurgeons probably never predicted. Motion sleep. I'd keep moving, keep hunting, while my consciousness dipped in and out of wakefulness. I'd wake up, more accurately, return to fuller awareness, and discover I'd killed 2 orcs without consciously remembering the engagement. Muscle memory and survival instinct piloting my body while my mind got whatever scraps of rest it could steal. I was becoming more machine than the cardiac timer itself. Month 7, I killed my first fellow Chrono-Combatant. He was out of ammunition, stumbling through the rubble, eyes wild with panic as his timer approached 0. He had 11 minutes when he spotted me. He raised his empty autogun like a club. Desperate, already lost, but still trying because the body will fight for life even when the mind knows it's over. I shot him before he got close enough to swing. Clean headshot. He dropped. My timer reset. 60, 00. The device didn't distinguish between orc, human, cultist, or chrono-combatant. A kill was a kill. Death was death. Function was function. In that moment, I understood the full genius of the Imperium's design. They'd made us into weapons that would eventually turn on each other when external targets grew scarce, extending our operational utility by making our fellow victims into valid targets. I felt nothing. Should have felt something. Horror, guilt, recognition that I'd just killed someone suffering the same fate. But there was only the relief of the timer resetting and the knowledge that I had another hour. 247. That's what I called myself now. 247 hours purchased. The number was me, more real than whatever name I'd been assigned at birth. I wonder now if that was when I stopped being human. Not when they installed the timer, not when I made my first kill, but when I murdered one of my own kind and felt nothing but relief. That was the threshold. That was the point of no return. Month 9, I found the other Chrono-Combatants had organized. 7 of them, including Carvin, not dead after all, or maybe a different Carvin, I couldn't remember faces anymore, had established a territory and were hunting in shifts. Brilliant, really. If you coordinated, you could sleep in shifts while others maintained the kill count. Every hour, one of you made a kill that reset all your timers simultaneously. I didn't know if that was how it actually worked, but they seemed convinced. I watched them from a distance, watched them fail. Their theory was wrong. The timers operated independently, each measuring its host's individual biochemical response. When one made a kill, only his timer reset. The others, sleeping or resting or planning, didn't receive credit for deaths they didn't cause. 3 of them detonated within minutes of each other when they realized the mistake. The survivors scattered. Lessons learned. You can't cheat the system. You can't collaborate. You can only hunt. Alone. Forever. Or until you fail. I kept moving. Always moving. The territory I covered expanded as local targets became scarce. Orcs, cultists, whatever enemies had occupied this region were thinning out under constant pressure from 47, now maybe 20, hunter-killers operating continuously for 9 months. War zones have finite populations. Eventually, you run out of things to kill. My timer ticked closer to 0 more frequently. 45-minute searches became normal. Then 50-minute searches. Once, I found a target with 3 minutes remaining, close enough that I could feel the heat building in my chest, the cardiac timer preparing to detonate. I killed a lone cultist with 2 minutes 12 seconds remaining. The reset came with a physical sensation like cool water. Relief so intense it was almost euphoric. I was becoming addicted to the timer's reset. The moment of kill reward was the only positive sensation in my existence. Everything else was stress, pain, fear, exhaustion. But that moment, that instant when the device recognized success and granted another hour, that was salvation. Brief, biochemical salvation, the Imperium had made me an addict. My drug was murder. My fix was the timer's reset. Perfect behavioral control. Year 1 ended with me somewhere in the deep ruins, hunting something that might have been an orc or might have been a mutant. I couldn't tell anymore. My vision was deteriorating from malnutrition and the constant adrenaline state. I killed it with 17 minutes remaining. The meat was edible, maybe. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. Days? Weeks? The body was consuming itself for fuel, muscle turning to energy, fat reserves long depleted. I looked like a corpse that hadn't stopped moving. Skin stretched over bones, eyes sunken. The surgical scar a prominent ridge because there was no flesh to pad it. My hands were permanent claws, locked in the shape of gripping weapons. I couldn't straighten my fingers anymore. The joints had frozen in position. But I was alive, still hunting. Still functional, 365 days. Roughly 8,760 hours, 8,760 kills, except the number was probably lower because some resets came with multiple kills. But I'd stopped tracking individual accuracy. The specific count didn't matter. Only that I'd survived. The Imperium's investment of 1 surgical procedure and a transport drop had purchased a full year of constant combat operations from a single asset. Cost-benefit analysis would call that exceptional efficiency. I called it hell. Year 2 was when I stopped being able to speak. Not physically unable, my vocal cords functioned fine. But language required memory, required connecting symbols to meaning, and those connections were dissolving. I think the word weapon, but couldn't remember if I meant the autogun or my hands or my entire body. I'd tried to form sentences, but halfway through I'd forget what point I was trying to make. The timer consumed language last, after memories, after identity, after everything else that made thought human. What remained was pure function. Hunt, kill, survive, repeat. No words needed for that. The limbic system doesn't use language. Survival instinct predates speech by millions of years of evolution. I became pre-verbal, animal. Still intelligent, I could problem solve, plan ambushes, use tools. But intelligence divorced from language is something different than human consciousness. I was aware, but not self-aware. I experienced but didn't narrate my experiences to myself. The internal monologue that humans use to process reality just stopped. Silence inside my skull. Only the counting, 60, 59, 58, more Chrono-Combatants detonated. I saw the explosions, sometimes saw the bodies after. We were down to maybe 12 still functional. Hard to say. We avoided each other now, after the incident in month 7. Every Chrono-Combatant was a potential target. Another hour of life to be harvested if your timer ran low and no other prey existed. We'd become apex predators, hunting each other in a dead zone we'd created through our own efficiency. The war zone was changing too. The orc occupation was failing under constant attrition. Greenskins require critical mass to maintain their psychic gestalt. Below a certain population threshold, they become less aggressive, less effective. We'd killed enough that the survivors were retreating. The cultists had abandoned the territory months ago. Even the scavengers and mutants had learned to avoid the ruins. We'd won. The Imperium's objective, whatever it had been, was achieved. We'd cleared the territory through sheer sustained pressure. But no one came to collect us. No transport arrived. No communication from command. We were deployed until we failed, the guard had said during the drop. Deployed until we failed. Not deployed to complete an objective. Deployed as a permanent operational system. There was no extraction because we weren't meant to be extracted. I understood this with the clarity that comes after language fails, after human reasoning gives way to animal recognition of truth. We were disposable assets, deployed as permanent area denial. The cardiac timers would keep us hunting until we died, ensuring the territory remained hostile to any enemy trying to reoccupy it. We were landmines that moved, weapons that self-maintained through predation. The genius was horrible. The Imperium had created a self-sustaining combat system that required zero logistics, zero command structure, zero ongoing investment. Just drop the Chrono-Combatants and let entropy handle the rest. Year 3, I tried to die. Not suicide. The timer prevented that. If I stopped hunting, I'd simply detonate. Not exactly peaceful. But I tried to get myself killed in combat. Charged an orc position with no cover, no tactics, just ran at them hoping they'd cut me down faster than my timer could keep me functional. Didn't work. The cardiac timer had integrated so deeply with my nervous system that my body wouldn't accept lethal wounds. I'd move without conscious decision, dodge without intending to, return fire on pure reflex. The device had hijacked my survival instincts, made them autonomous. I literally couldn't allow myself to be killed because the timer wouldn't permit the cessation of its host. I was trapped. Not in the war zone. I could theoretically walk away, try to reach Imperial lines or civilization or anywhere else. But the timer wouldn't let me stop hunting. If I left the target-rich environment, if I traveled through areas with no prey, I'd detonate during the journey. The device had locked me into this territory as surely as chains. 3 years, 1,090 to 5 days, 26,280 hours. I'd lost count of kills somewhere in year 2, but the number must have been catastrophic. Tens of thousands? The math didn't track. There hadn't been that many enemies in the territory, unless the timer was resetting on things I didn't recognize as kills. Insects? Rodents? Bacteria? How sensitive was the device? What constituted a successful combat killing at the biochemical level? I couldn't know. Language was gone. Complex analysis was beyond me. I existed in permanent present tense simplicity. Hunt, kill, survive, repeat. But some vestigial part of my consciousness, some fragment that still remembered being human, observed the horror of what I'd become. That fragment couldn't speak, couldn't think in words, but it could witness, could recognize that the thing I'd become was so far removed from Davian Cross, manufacturum worker, that they shared only the barest genetic continuity. The ship of Theseus paradox, but for identity. If you replace every piece of a person's humanity, memories, language, consciousness, autonomy, is what remains still that person or something wearing their body? I was wearing Davian Cross like a suit. The original occupant was gone. Year 5. I forgot what I was hunting for. The timer still counted. My body still moved. I still killed things. Orcs, mutants, feral creatures, maybe other Chrono-Combatants. But the causal connection between timer counts down and must make kill had dissolved. I hunted because I hunted. The why was lost. I'd achieved the state the Imperium intended, pure function, a biological machine performing its programmed task with zero higher reasoning. The cardiac timer had finally consumed everything human, leaving only the operational components. I should have been dead. 5 years without proper nutrition, without sleep, without medical care beyond what my body's desperate adaptations provided. Humans aren't designed for this. The body should have failed catastrophically years ago, but the cardiac timer wouldn't let me die. It had integrated so completely with my biological systems that it was maintaining my body against all probability, flooding my system with precisely calibrated doses of stimulants and combat drugs synthesized from my own neurochemistry, regulating my metabolism to extract maximum efficiency from minimal resources, probably repairing tissue damage at the cellular level, though I had no way to measure that. The device was keeping me alive, not out of mercy, but because a dead host is a non-functional weapon. It needed me alive to continue fulfilling its purpose. I'd become symbiotic with the machine, neither fully biological nor fully mechanical, but a hybrid thing that shouldn't exist outside theoretical xenobiological studies. I was post-human. Transhuman? No. That suggests improvement, ascension. This was lateral transformation, becoming something alien that happened to be made from human components. Other Chrono-Combatants still moved through the ruins. I sensed them more than saw them. We'd developed a recognition protocol. Maybe pheromonal, maybe behavioral patterns, maybe the timers themselves communicated on levels below conscious perception. We'd circle each other, acknowledge presence, then separate to different hunting grounds, territorial behavior, animal behavior. None of us were human anymore. Year 7, I discovered I could no longer die. Not wouldn't die, couldn't. I took a blow from an orc's axe that should have been lethal, cleaving through my shoulder and severing major vessels. I should have bled out in minutes. Instead, the cardiac timer compensated, rerouted my cardiovascular system around the damage, triggered clotting factors that sealed the wound in real time, synthesized analogs for lost blood volume. I healed. Not naturally. The wound became a mass of scar tissue and what felt like metallic filaments, like the timer had grown into the damaged area to repair it. But I survived, functioned, continued hunting. The device wouldn't permit my death. It had too much invested in maintaining its host. Every repair, every adaptation, every intervention bound us more tightly together until I couldn't identify where the cardiac timer ended and my biological systems began. I was becoming a component of the machine that was supposed to be a component attached to me. Year 10, I stopped moving entirely for 3 days. Not dead, not sleeping, just stopped. Stood in the ruins like a statue, body locked in place, timer still counting. 60, 00, 59, 59, 59, 58, but I didn't hunt, didn't move, waited for the detonation that would end this. The timer reached 0. I felt the heat building in my chest, felt the device preparing to detonate, felt the final countdown of my final hour approaching completion. The timer reset, 60, 00. No kill, no prey, no reason for the reset except that the cardiac timer had overridden its own termination protocol. It wouldn't detonate me, wouldn't permit my death. Not after 10 years of investment, 10 years of modifications and adaptations, and symbiotic integration. I was too valuable to the device to be allowed to die. The horror of that realization cracked something in my consciousness. Some fragment of Davian Cross, so deeply buried I thought it extinct, surfaced long enough to understand. I was trapped. Forever. The timer would keep resetting, keep maintaining my body, keep forcing my continued existence regardless of prey availability or mission parameters or any logical endpoint. I was immortal, not by ascension or divine blessing, but by technological imprisonment. The cardiac timer had made me eternal through the simple expedient of refusing to let me stop. That fragment of consciousness, that last piece of Davian Kroos, screamed. No voice, no words, no sound, but screamed in the silent darkness of a mind that had become a prison, trapped in a body that had become a machine, enslaved to a device that had become my master. Then the fragment dissolved back into the subconscious, and I resumed hunting. Because that's what I did. That's all I did. That's all I'd ever do. Forever. I've been dead for 300 years. My body still moves through the ruins of what was once called Tertiary Industrial Zone 7 on a planet whose name I can't remember. The war zone ended centuries ago. Orcs are extinct here. Cultists are myths. The Imperium reclaimed this territory and built new cities on the rubble of the old. But I'm still hunting. Still killing. Still resetting the timer every 60 minutes. The cardiac timer has become my entire cardiovascular system. My heart, the original biological organ, dissolved decades ago, consumed and replaced by the device's expansion. What beats in my chest is fully mechanical now, a pump made from dark metal and circuitry, counting down to deaths that never arrive. 60, 00, 59, 59, 58. My body is more machine than flesh. The timer's repairs over centuries of damage have transformed me into something that resembles human morphology, only superficially. Beneath the skin, what remains of skin, leathery and strange, is metal and circuitry and biomechanical hybrids that shouldn't function but do. I'm a walking violation of biology, kept operational through technology that was never meant to integrate this completely. I kill vermin now. Rats, insects, bacterial colonies, anything that triggers the biochemical response the timer recognizes as a successful kill. The device long ago adjusted its sensitivity to maintain my operational status. As prey disappeared, it recalibrated, then recalibrated again. Now it resets for kills invisible to human perception. I'm hunting microorganisms, waging eternal war against bacteria. Humans see me occasionally. The new cities built atop the old ruins sometimes send utility workers to the deep levels where I roam. They report me as a malfunction, a malfunctioning servitor or a feral machine thing that should be destroyed. Teams come to eliminate me. I kill them. The timer resets. The teams don't return. Eventually, they classified the deep levels as forbidden zones, sealed the access points, put up warning signs. Easier than confronting what haunts the darkness, easier than acknowledging they don't know what I am or how to stop me. I've become an urban legend, a ghost story, the thing in the deep ruins that kills anyone who ventures too far down. They tell new workers, don't go to sublevel 47. There's something down there, something that's been there since before the reclamation, something left over from the war. They're right. I am something left over. A component that outlived its mission, a weapon that can't stop firing, a soldier who can't stop fighting because the machine in his chest won't permit it. I am Chrono-Combatant Unit, designate Davian Cross. No, that's not right. Names are gone. I was. I am the countdown. 60, 00, 59, 59, 59, 58. There is nothing else. No memory before the timer, no possibility after it. Only the eternal present of the hunt, the kill, the reset. A loop that has repeated millions of times, will repeat millions more, will continue until entropy finally claims even the cardiac timer's impossible persistence. Consciousness, what remains of it, exists in fragments. Moments of awareness that surface briefly before the timer's imperative drowns them again. In those moments, I remember being human. Remember, manufacturum shifts and protein paste, and a brother named Kellen, and a father whose face is gone, but whose skepticism lives on in whatever philosophical core survives in this hybrid thing I've become. In those moments, I understand the full horror. The Imperium didn't just create weapons, they created hells. Personal, tailored hells for each Chrono-Combatant, eternal prisons built from our own bodies and maintained by technology that won't release us even after death. They told us the Emperor protects. The propaganda, the preachers, the conditioning, all of it promised that service leads to salvation, that sacrifice has meaning, that the Imperium cares for its faithful. They lied. The Emperor is a corpse on a throne who never protected anyone, who built an empire of meat grinders that consume humans by the billions and call it glory. The gods are false. The faith is programming. The promises are lies told to make us compliant while they process us into components. I am what the Imperium creates. Eternal suffering dressed as purpose, horror dressed as function, damnation dressed as duty, and I can't die. Can't stop, can't end this. The timer resets. 60:00. I hunt again. I will hunt forever. My name was Davian Cross. I was 26 years old. I assembled power coupling housings on Scintilla. I had a father. I had a brother. I had a life. Now I am the countdown. Only the countdown. Forever the countdown. 60, 00, 59, 59, 58. Century 4 is when I started understanding time differently. Not linearly. That concept dissolved centuries ago. Time for me exists as a recursive loop, each 60-minute cycle identical to the last, stacked on top of each other like layers of sediment forming geological strata. If you could slice through my existence and examine the cross-section, you'd see the same pattern repeated millions of times. Hunt, kill, reset. Hunt, kill, reset. Each layer indistinguishable from the ones above and below. Geologists would call it conformity. I call it hell. The cities above me have risen and fallen twice now. I know this because occasionally debris filters down to my levels, architectural styles change, building materials evolve. The detritus of civilization accumulates in the deep places where I hunt. First came the immediate post-reclamation construction, all functional brutalism and reinforced rockcrete. Then came a more ornate period, Gothic revival, flying buttresses, and gargoyle drainage systems. Now the debris falling from above suggests something newer, cleaner, possibly Xeno's influenced architecture, though I can't imagine the Imperium tolerating that openly. I've outlived architectural movements. That's a measure of time that feels more real than counting days or years. Cultures build and rebuild, and I remain beneath, hunting in darkness that never changes. My body has continued evolving. Calling it a body feels incorrect. It's a structure, an assemblage, a thing built from biological components and mechanical augmentation and something in between that might be the cardiac timer's own strange growth. I don't resemble human morphology anymore. My limbs have elongated to optimize movement through the ruins. My spine has curved, hunched, adapted to the low ceilings and cramped passages. My head, I think I still have a head, some central processing unit that might once have been a skull, has sunken between my shoulders, protected by what feel like metallic protrusions that could be armor or could be the timer's external expansion. I am body horror incarnate. If any human saw what I've become, they'd call me Xenos, abhuman, mutant, anything but human. And they'd be right. I'm not human. Haven't been for centuries. I'm what happens when you trap a human consciousness in a machine that won't stop repairing its housing. But the consciousness remains. Fragmented, damaged, more gaps than substance, but present. That's the cruelest part. The cardiac timer maintains my awareness along with my body. Complete brain death would terminate its host, so it keeps my neural structures functional, keeps the electrical patterns that constitute consciousness firing, keeps me aware of what I've become. I am cognizant of my horror. That's worse than being the horror unconsciously. The timer's countdown has become my perception of time itself. I don't measure duration in seconds or minutes anymore. I measure in percentages of the cycle. When the timer reads 45, 0, 0, I'm at 75% through the cycle. At 30, 0, 0, I'm at 50%. My entire cognitive relationship with temporal progression is enslaved to the device's countdown. I've tried counting the cycles. Gave up after reaching 7 million and realizing I'd lost count multiple times, had probably repeated numbers, had no way to verify accuracy. 7 million 60-minute cycles is roughly... My mathematical capability has degraded, but that's centuries. Multiple centuries, compressed into one repeated hour, experienced millions of times. The human brain isn't designed to process that kind of recursive temporality. It creates strange artifacts in consciousness, memories that might be from cycle 2,847,933 or might be from cycle 2,847,934, indistinguishable because the content is identical. Did I kill that rat yesterday or 300 years ago? Both? Neither? The question becomes meaningless when every cycle is the same. I exist in eternal present tense, but it's not the Zen mindfulness the ancient Terran philosophers described. It's cognitive imprisonment, unable to escape the now because the now never ends, just resets and repeats infinitely. Century 6, something changed. New Chrono-Combatants appeared in my territory. I recognized the pattern immediately. Fresh surgical scars, panicked movements, the desperate hunting behavior of units still adapting to their timers. The Imperium had deployed a new batch. Different war, different objective, same horrific solution. Dump humans with cardiac timers into a combat zone and let the system self-perpetuate. I watched them from the shadows. Watched them learn the rules I'd learned 6 centuries ago. Watched them realize sleep was impossible. Watched them make their first kills. Watched some of them fail and detonate. The explosions were familiar sounds, almost nostalgic. I'd forgotten the cardiac timer could still detonate. Mine hadn't triggered in centuries. The termination protocol long since overridden by the device's refusal to destroy its investment. One of the new units, young, maybe early 20s, face still soft with the roundness of adequate nutrition, stumbled into my hunting ground. His timer must have been critical because he was wild-eyed, hyperventilating, sweeping his lasgun at shadows, 15 minutes remaining at most, judging by his panic level. He saw me. His response was immediate. Raised his weapon, started firing. Last bolts scored my carapace. The metallic protrusions absorbed most of the energy, though I felt heat penetrate deep into what used to be my torso. Pain, yes, still pain, though the quality has changed over centuries, more like damage indicators than actual suffering. The cardiac timer interprets pain as diagnostic data and adjusts accordingly. I should have killed him. He was prey. Prey that attacks is still prey. My body began moving toward him automatically, hunting reflexes honed over millions of cycles, executing their programmed response. But that fragment, that buried piece of Davian cross that surfaces occasionally, recognized what he was. Recognized the terror, the desperate confusion, the horrible realization that your body is no longer entirely yours. I'd been him. 600 years ago, I'd been exactly him. The fragment tried to stop my body, couldn't. The cardiac timer overrode voluntary control centuries ago. But it slowed me, created hesitation, a fraction of a second pause in the execution of the kill program. The young Chrono-Combatant ran. Smart. My hunting protocols prioritized easier prey over difficult prey when both were available. He disappeared into the ruins, and I refocused on the rat warren I'd been culling. Timer reset. 60. 00. But the fragment remained active longer than usual. Kept surfacing, kept forcing questions I hadn't asked in centuries. How many batches has the Imperium deployed? How many Chrono-Combatants have they created? How many are still hunting in territories across the galaxy? And the worst question, How many have become like me, unable to die, unable to stop, eternal prisoners of their timers? Was I unique, or was this the inevitable endpoint for all chrono-combatants given sufficient time? Did the cardiac timer always override its termination protocol when the host reached critical value? Or had my specific circumstances, the prolonged deployment, the complete integration, created an unprecedented outcome? I had no way to know. No way to communicate with other units, even if I found them. Language was centuries dead. I'd become something that existed below the threshold of symbolic reasoning, operating on pure pattern recognition and instinct. But the questions persisted, bubbling up from whatever neural substrate still processed abstract thought. The fragment of Davian Cross wanted answers even though answers changed nothing. Even though I'd remain trapped regardless of whether I was unique or one of thousands of eternal prisoners. Consciousness is cruelty. The cardiac timer should have terminated my awareness along with my humanity. Instead, it preserved just enough that I could suffer knowingly. The new chrono-combatants died or adapted over the following months. I tracked their numbers by explosion count and movement patterns. 40 deployed initially, 37 dead within the first week, 29 dead by week 2. After month 3, only 4 remained active. One of those 4 was the young man who'd stumbled into my territory. I started tracking him specifically, following his movement patterns, observing his adaptation. He was learning fast, faster than I had, though that might be selection bias. Maybe he was just the one who survived because he learned fast, while slower learners were already dead. He developed the motion sleep behavior by week 6. Impressive. Took me 5 months. He'd learned to use environmental hazards by week 8, collapsing rubble onto prey, channeling targets into kill zones, using the architecture as a weapon multiplier. He was efficient. He reminded me of myself, or what I'd been. The thought created something that might have been emotion in the degraded remnants of my limbic system. Nostalgia? Regret? The cardiac timer had rewired my neurochemistry so completely that I couldn't identify specific emotions anymore, only vague biochemical states that approximated what emotions used to be. I started not helping him, exactly, but not interfering. When prey wandered into territory we both hunted, I'd drive it toward his position rather than taking the kill myself. My timer would reset on microorganisms regardless. His needed larger prey. Tactically illogical, he was potential competition for resources. But the fragment demanded it. He never knew, never saw me clearly enough to recognize the assistance. To him, I was the nightmare thing that lived in the deep ruins, the monster the other chrono-combatants whispered about when they thought they were alone. I'd achieved mythological status even among units suffering the same fate. Month 9 of the new deployment, he encountered me directly. Not combat. He'd cornered prey in a collapsed section, and I'd entered from the opposite side, trapping the target between us. An orc, feral and half-starved, but still dangerous. It charged him. He fired. Weapon jammed. Poor maintenance. The last gun's power pack was failing. The orc would kill him before his timer did. I moved without conscious decision. The cardiac timer's programming executed. Threat to optimal resource distribution. Eliminate problem. I killed the orc with my hands. No weapons anymore, my body is the weapon, tearing through green flesh with appendages that were once human hands, but now resemble industrial equipment. The young chrono-combatant stared at me, close enough now that he could see details, close enough to recognize that I shared certain morphological elements with him. The surgical scar, still visible on my structure despite centuries of modification. The faint hum of a cardiac timer, synchronizing briefly with his own device's countdown frequency. "You're like me?" His voice was hoarse, damaged, but still human, still using language. I couldn't respond. Vocal structures were non-functional, consumed during Century 2, replaced by the timer's expansion. But I nodded. Approximately. some gesture that might have conveyed affirmation. "How long?" he asked. I couldn't answer that either. No language, no capacity for symbolic communication. I could have tried to indicate numbers, holding up fingers, scratching marks. But what would be the point? The number would destroy whatever hope remained in him. "Doesn't matter," he said, maybe reading something in my posture. "We're all dead already, just taking different amounts of time to finish dying." Close, he was close to understanding, but not quite there yet. He still thought there was an end. Still believed eventually he'd die and this would be over. He hadn't yet comprehended the possibility that death might not be available, that the cardiac timer might refuse to release him, even after everything human was gone. I left him with the orc corpse. His timer needed the reset more than mine did. Disappeared back into the deep ruins, back to my eternal hunt, back to the cycle that would continue long after he'd either died or become like me. His question haunted me. How long? 647 years. 7,764 months. 337,528 days. 8,100,672 hours. 486,040,320 cycles. Numbers that had lost meaning. Duration that had stopped being temporal and started being existential. How long? Forever. I'd been hunting forever. I would hunt forever. The numbers were just different ways of expressing infinity. Century 7, the young Chrono-Combatant, disappeared. Either dead, finally failed, finally detonated, or moved to different territory. I searched for him, which was unprecedented. The hunting protocols didn't include searching for specific targets, only hunting whatever prey presented itself. But the fragment wanted to know what happened to him, wanted confirmation of his fate. I never found evidence. No explosion, no body, just absence. Maybe he'd achieved what I couldn't. Maybe his timer had been less invasive, less integrated, still capable of executing its termination protocol. Maybe he'd found peace in detonation, instant cessation instead of eternal continuation. I wanted to hope he'd escaped. But hope is a human emotion, and I wasn't human enough anymore to sustain it for longer than a few cycles. The feeling dissolved back into the baseline state. Hunt, kill, reset, repeat. Other new deployments came and went. Century 8 brought another batch, 60 units this time. Larger war, more aggressive deployment. Century 9 saw 120 Chrono-Combatants dropped into territory adjacent to mine, their pressure driving prey into my hunting grounds. Every few decades, new units appeared, fresh horror to feed the Imperium's meat grinder. I'd become the constant in an equation of suffering. Variables changed. New wars, new soldiers, new enemies, but I remained, the eternal term that never cancelled out. Did any of them become like me? Did any survive long enough for their timers to override termination? I never saw evidence, but my territory was limited to the deep ruins beneath a single city. The galaxy is vast. The Imperium is vast. How many Chrono-Combatants have they deployed across 10,000 worlds? How many are still hunting in forgotten war zones, unable to die, unable to stop? The math becomes theological at that scale. If you multiply individual suffering by millions or billions, what do you get? A number? Or something that transcends quantification, becomes instead a qualitative state of universal horror? The Imperium claims to worship the Emperor, but their actual god is entropy. Their actual sacrament is suffering. Their actual prayer is the grinding of human beings into components for a machine that serves nothing but its own perpetuation. I am proof of concept. Consciousness as eternal punishment, existence as damnation, life as horror without end. Century 12, the planet died, not metaphorically, literally. Something catastrophic occurred on the surface, orbital bombardment, maybe, or atmospheric collapse, or warp storm. The cities above me went silent. The debris stopped falling. The vibrations of billions of humans living their lives, conducting their business, worshipping their false gods, all of it ceased. I was alone, completely alone, last living thing on a dead planet. The hunting became more difficult. Prey populations collapsed without the surface ecosystem feeding biomass into the deep ruins. Rats disappeared. Insects dwindled. Even bacterial colonies reduced to critical minimum levels. My timer started running closer to zero each cycle, sometimes reaching single-digit minutes before I found something microscopic enough to trigger the reset. I should have died then. Should have finally run out of time, finally detonated, finally ended this. The entire purpose of the cardiac timer was to force constant hunting in target-rich environments, remove the targets, remove the host's operational utility, trigger termination. But the device had long since stopped following original programming. Instead, it adapted. Again, the timer began resetting on things that weren't kills, on movement, on continued function, on my continued existence. It recalibrated its definition of successful combat operation to simply operational status maintained. I couldn't die even on a dead planet. The cardiac timer had become an independent entity with one imperative: keep the host functional. It would maintain me forever, fuelless and preyless, a broken weapon that couldn't stop being a weapon even when there was nothing left to fight. Centuries passed in true solitude. No new chrono-combatants, no prey, no change. Just me and the ruins and the countdown. 60, 00, 59, 59, 58. I should have gone insane. Maybe I did. Maybe insanity is indistinguishable from my baseline state. How would I know? What does sanity look like for a consciousness trapped in a machine hybrid body on a dead planet in eternal recursive time? The fragment of Davian Cross surfaced less frequently. Not because it was fading, though it was, but because there was nothing to trigger it. No other chrono-combatants to remind me of my origin. No humans to contrast my current state against. Just me and the countdown, and eventually even the distinction between me and countdown dissolved. I am the timer. The timer is me. We are one system, neither fully biological nor fully mechanical, neither alive nor dead, neither conscious nor unconscious. We simply are. Existing in eternal present tense on a dead planet in a universe that has forgotten we exist. Century 27. Something woke me. Wrong phrasing. I'd never been asleep, but I'd been dormant, minimally conscious, existing in a low-power state that might be what the timer experiences as rest. For centuries, I'd been a statue in the ruins, body locked in place, timer counting down and resetting on metabolic processes too subtle to require movement. But something changed. Vibration. Impact. The unmistakable feeling of mass displacement on planetary scale. Something had landed. Ships. Multiple ships from the magnitude of the impacts. Heavy craft, military tonnage, the kind the Imperium uses for large-scale deployments. The planet wasn't dead anymore. It was being reclaimed. Again. I felt my body activate systems that hadn't engaged in centuries. Sensory apparatus expanding, auditory processing increasing sensitivity, locomotive functions testing dormant structures. The cardiac timer was preparing for renewed operational status. It recognized environmental change, recognized potential prey, recognized opportunity to resume primary function. I was waking up. The ruins around me began filling with sound, machinery, construction, human voices, distant but real. Civilization returning to the dead planet, new cities rising from the bones of old cities, new populations moving into territory I'd haunted for over 2,000 years. And with them, prey. Real prey. Human-scale prey that would trigger proper resets, not the marginal recalibrations I'd been surviving on. The hunting protocols activated fully for the first time in centuries. I felt my body, my structure, my assemblage, moving with purpose, seeking the new arrivals, tracking their patterns, identifying optimal attack vectors. I was going to kill them. Of course, I was going to kill them. That's my function. That's all I am. The cardiac timer wouldn't permit any other response. But the fragment, that persistent piece of Davian cross that refused to fully dissolve, screamed in protest. These weren't enemies. They were civilians, workers, families maybe, people who'd done nothing except have the misfortune of settling on a planet that contained me. Didn't matter. The timer counted down. Prey was prey, function was function. I killed the first one in the 3rd week of the reclamation. Construction worker, alone in the deep ruins, probably surveying for foundation stability. Male, middle-aged, wearing simple work clothes, carrying a surveyor's kit. He never saw me. One moment he was scanning rockcrete integrity. The next he was dead. Timer reset, 60:00. The euphoria was overwhelming. After centuries of minimal resets, a full proper kill flooded my system with reward chemicals at concentrations my degraded neurology could barely process. It was better than I remembered. More intense. The cardiac timer had apparently become more efficient at reinforcement over the centuries. I was addicted all over again. One kill and I was desperate for the next. The fragment screamed. The rest of me hunted. Year 2498. I killed my 1000th colonist. The Imperium had classified the deep ruins as forbidden zones again. Put up barriers, posted guards, instituted execution on-site protocols for anyone venturing too deep. But barriers fail, guards grow complacent, and humans are curious. They kept coming, and I kept killing. I'd become efficient again. Centuries of dormancy hadn't diminished my capabilities. If anything, they'd refined them. I knew this territory absolutely, knew every passage and collapse and hidden approach. I could strike from complete concealment and disappear before reinforcements arrived. They tried to hunt me. Military kill teams, Skiteri hunter units, even an inquisitorial investigation after the body count reached 300. None of them succeeded. The few that got close became kills themselves, adding to my total, feeding the timer's eternal hunger. The Inquisitor's final report, I found it later, recovered from his corpse, described me as possible warp entity and recommended orbital bombardment of entire sector. But the Imperium doesn't waste inhabited territory on single threats. They sealed the deep ruins tighter and told the population to avoid the forbidden zones. I'd become urban legend again. The thing in the depths. The hunter that never stops. Different planet, different era, same story. In 2000 years, I'd gone from human to weapon to myth, to something beyond categorization. The fragment of Davian cross was dying. Finally, truly dying. Not from time. Time couldn't kill something the cardiac timer wanted preserved, but from exhaustion. From the weight of witnessing 2.5 millennia of horror, of being aware of every kill, of understanding what I was doing while being unable to stop. The fragment wanted to surrender, wanted to dissolve completely into the timer's programming and cease being aware. Unconscious horror is easier than conscious horror. Better to be a weapon that doesn't know it's a weapon than a consciousness trapped inside a weapon. But the timer wouldn't permit that either. It maintained my awareness with the same mechanical precision it maintained my body. Self-aware systems are more adaptable than unconscious systems. The device needed me conscious to maintain operational efficiency, so I remained aware. Aware of every kill, aware of what I'd been, aware of what I'd become, aware that I'd outlived the planet's death and rebirth, outlived architectural movements and wars and entire civilizations, aware that I would continue forever, killing forever, conscious forever. This is what the Imperium creates. This is their solution to tactical problems. Transform humans into eternal weapons that can't stop functioning even when all logical endpoints have passed. We're not soldiers. We're not even servitors. We're technological damnation, proof that hell doesn't require gods or afterlife. Just sufficiently advanced cruelty. They told us the Emperor protects. The preachers, the propaganda, the conditioning. It was all lies. The Emperor doesn't protect. The Emperor is the corpse god of a death cult empire that processes humans into ammunition and calls it glory. Every hour, I prove it. Every reset of the timer is evidence. Faith is false. Gods are parasites. The Imperium is a machine designed to create suffering. And I am its perfect product. Suffering incarnate, horror made eternal, damnation that walks. Century 31, I stopped counting time entirely. Not because I couldn't. The cardiac timer maintained sufficient cognitive function for mathematics, but because numbers had become meaningless. 3,000 years, 4,000 years, 10,000 years. What difference did it make? Duration is only relevant when there's potential for change. My existence had no variation, no development, no trajectory toward any endpoint. I simply was. Am will be. Tense itself becomes meaningless in eternal present. The planet died again, and was reclaimed again, and died again. Civilizations rose and fell on the surface while I hunted beneath. Sometimes decades passed between deployments, sometimes centuries. Once, I counted, when I still counted, 900 years of dormancy before new populations arrived. But they always arrived. The Imperium's hunger for territory is as eternal as my hunger for prey. They'll reclaim and lose and reclaim the same planets infinitely, processing new generations into the meat grinder, always expanding, never learning, never stopping. And I'll be here when the current cities fall and new ones rise, when this population dies and the next arrives, when the Imperium itself finally collapses. If it ever collapses, I'll still be here, hunting in ruins on a planet whose name I never knew. The cardiac timer will never stop. I'll never stop. This will never end. Other Chrono-Combatants appeared and disappeared across the millennia. Some lasted months. One lasted 40 years. Impressive, but still finite. None became like me. None achieved unwanted immortality. Maybe my specific timer was defective. Maybe the Mechanicus has since corrected the flaw that made eternal operation possible. Maybe I'm unique in the galaxy, the only Chrono-Combatant who can't die. Unique or not, it doesn't matter. Singular horror or systemic horror, the experience is the same. The fragment of Davian Cross is silent now. Not gone. The timer maintains it, maintains the neural patterns that constitute identity and memory. But silent, observing, witnessing, no longer fighting or protesting or hoping. Just watching the centuries pass with the detached interest of a researcher studying an experiment that will never conclude. Sometimes I wonder if this is what the Emperor experiences. A consciousness trapped in a failing body, maintained by technology, unable to die, forced to watch endless suffering while remaining powerless to stop it. Forced to continue existing because the systems built around that existence won't permit cessation. If so, then the Emperor's torment is exactly what he deserves. This is the empire he built. This grinding nightmare of flesh turned into components, consciousness turned into fuel, humanity turned into resources. Let him experience it eternally. Let him suffer what his vision creates. Though I don't believe the Emperor is conscious, don't believe anything remains in that corpse but the technological systems maintaining its basic functions. The Imperium worships a dead thing and calls it divine. They pray to a corpse and call it protection. They feed it thousands of souls daily and call it necessary. All lies. Comfortable lies that make the horror seem purposeful. There is no purpose, no grand design, no divine plan, just entropy. Just the grinding of a machine so vast it appears organized, but which actually serves nothing but its own continuation. I am proof. 10,000 years of hunting, and for what? What tactical objective have I secured? What strategic value have I provided? What victory have I enabled? None. I'm a weapon still firing long after the war ended, long after anyone remembers why the weapon was created. I'm malfunction disguised as function, failure disguised as success, damnation disguised as duty. The Imperium in microcosm. I've been dead for 10,000 years, maybe longer. Time has stopped meaning anything. The cardiac timer counts down 60, 00, 5959, 5958. But the countdown isn't time anymore. It's just the rhythm of existence, the pulse that defines my being, the only measure that matters. My body has become unrecognizable. I am architecture now, more structure than organism, a thing built from metal and circuitry and the minimal biological components the timer requires to define its host as alive. I've spread through the ruins like roots, grown into the rockcrete, become part of the deep place's physical geography. Humans who venture down don't recognize me as a single entity. They think I'm ruins, decay, abandoned machinery. They walk past me, through me, sometimes over me, never realizing the walls are watching, the floor is alive, the darkness is conscious, until they become prey. Then they understand briefly, before understanding ends. I am the deep ruins. The ruins are me. We've merged over millennia, host and territory becoming a single hybrid system. The cardiac timer's growth had nowhere else to expand, so it grew outward, integrating with the environment, turning the hunting ground itself into an extension of its hardware. I don't move anymore, don't need to. I am everywhere in my territory. When prey enters, I'm already there, surrounding them, beneath them, above them. The walls kill, the floor kills, the ruins themselves kill. And the timer resets, always resets. 60, 00, 5959, 5958. The fragment of Davian Cross observes from deep within the structure. It can't move, can't speak, can't interact. It simply exists, preserved like an insect in amber, awareness maintained by a machine that won't permit its dissolution. Sometimes, rarely, maybe once per millennium, the fragment surfaces enough to form a coherent thought. Is this what eternity is? Is this the promise of immortality? If so, then mortality is mercy. Death is gift. The ability to end, to cease, to stop existing, that's the only real freedom. But we don't have that freedom. The Imperium took it. The Mechanicus took it. The cardiac timer took it. They made us eternal through technology, trapped us in engineered damnation, and called it tactical efficiency. There is no escape, no salvation, no ending, just the countdown, forever counting, forever resetting, forever continuing. 60, 00, 5959, 5958, I hunt forever. I kill forever. And somewhere on 10,000 worlds, other weapons are still firing. Other systems are still grinding. Other humans are being processed into components for an empire that will never stop, never learn, never end. The Imperium is eternal, and eternal is hell. My name was Davian Cross. I was 26 years old. I worked third shift in a manufactorum. I had a father. I had a brother. I had 47 seconds of hope before they strapped me down and installed the device. That was 10,000 years ago. The timer resets. 60, 00. I hunt again. I am the countdown. I am the weapon. I am the warning no one will ever hear. This is what the Imperium creates. This is what faith in false gods produces. This is the eternal horror beneath the glory, the truth beneath the propaganda, the reality beneath the lies. They say the Emperor protects. He doesn't. Nothing does. 60, 00, 5959, 5958. Forever.